Hello everyone, it's been a while since my last top 10 video and this is one I've been wanting to make for quite some time. Today I'm going to start my countdown of my top 10 all-time favourite Build-A-Figures from the Marvel Legends line. It's amazing to think now that the line once existed without the Build-A-Figure component. It's something we take for granted these days, that with every successive wave there's going to be a Build-A-Figure, whether it's large or small. We know that we're going to get an extra character with each wave that we buy. But it's funny to think that the introduction of the Build-A-Figure concept actually only arrived in 2005 with the Galactus wave. And those early BAFs proved to be so successful that they've been with us ever since. So I'm going to start my countdown of my personal favourite top 10 Build-A-Figures. And since there's quite a lot to get through, I'm going to break this video into two parts. So today I'm going to count down from 10 to 6, and in the next video I'll pick up 5 to 1. Kicking us off at number 10, I have the Controller. Now, the Controller is actually a relatively recent Build-A-Figure, actually just came out this year. And I suspect he might be a controversial entry on this list, and maybe not everyone is going to agree with me, but I have to say I really love this figure, and there's a few reasons why I've got him in my number 10 spot. First of all, I think this is a fantastic figure in its own right. I think it's a really excellently made figure. I think it's got fantastic articulation. I think it looks great. It's oversized, which is brilliant. He's a little bit bigger than your standard Marvel Legends 6-inch action figure, which is great. He probably stands at about 7 or 8 inches, which is pretty cool. So he's got a bit of depth and girth to him, which is great. And whilst his parts are mostly recycled from the Thanos figure, I still think that this is very nicely done. I think the paint apps are very nicely applied. I love this metallic blue paint that's on his gauntlets and on his shoulder pads there. I think it's a really nice touch. But also some of the white areas they've employed across the body as well to just give him a little bit more texture and depth. I think this is a great looking figure. I really like this head sculpt as well. I think they've just nailed it. It's pretty much perfect. There's not much I can really fault this figure for. It's also a character I've wanted for a very long time. He's slightly more obscure. He hasn't obviously starred in a major Marvel movie as yet. And for me, as a long-term collector, this is something I've always really loved and appreciated about the Marvel Legends line, is that they took a few chances and have produced some of the more obscure characters to really help us flesh out the Marvel universe. So I really love that we have this character. It's one I've always wanted, and perhaps that is colouring my perception, but I have to say, I really like this figure. Coming in just slightly ahead of the Controller is Onslaught, or the Red Skull, depending on which version of this figure you wanted to build. Because originally this was a Red Skull Build-A-Figure, this Red Skull being taken from the Axis crossover event in the comics, which was the Build-A-Figure for a Captain America wave. However, in a subsequent X-Men themed wave, they actually gave the head of Onslaught to the Kitty Pryde figure, which weirdly enough also happened to be the Onslaught Build-A-Figure wave as well. So for me, the fact that we have this versatility, that we can have two very different characters utilised in one Build-A-Figure, and we can display whichever one we personally want to, certainly qualifies it for being on my top 10 list, because I think that's a really cool option, and it just makes it very fun. But added to this, I have to say I think this figure is pretty damn cool in its own right. I think I'm right in saying that pretty much every part of this figure is unique. There's no recycled parts here. Everything has been sculpted specifically for this release, which makes him unique. It makes him pretty interesting, and I've always had a soft spot for Onslaught. I grew up reading comics, X-Men comics at this time, and I absolutely love this character. I love the look, I love the design, I love the colour scheme, and I've always really wanted an Onslaught. Now, of course, we did get an Onslaught from ToyBiz. That was also a Build-A-Figure, but it left a little something to be desired. They went with a very different approach of focusing much more on the bug-like version of the character that we've seen across the years. But for me, this is the definitive look. This is the one I always wanted, and I'm really pleased to have him in the collection. Now, I think the articulation is a little bit compromised by their shoulder pads, and there's definitely things you could criticise it for. There's not an awful lot of shading, for example, which would have really enhanced this. But all in all, I think this is a wonderful figure to add to the collection, and I'm so glad to have him in my collection. He's one of my all-time favourites. In at number 8, I have nemesis. Now, I'm on a little bit of shaky ground here, I will freely admit, because I actually don't own this figure. Maybe that's part of the reason why it's actually on my list. Something I really very much want. I think it's a really cool character, and again, it represents one of those more obscure characters that you wouldn't necessarily expect to get in a Marvel Legends line, so I think that's a definite feather in this figure's cap. Now, I think the look and design of the character is very cool. Anyway, visually, it's got a very strong aesthetic, which I think is great. It's bright, it's colourful, and it's very different. Again, it has a completely brand new, unique mould exclusive to this figure, which has never been recycled since. That is very, very cool. I love having something distinctive and different in my collection, and as I said, I really like the look of this character anyway. I like how, of course, you can lift the helmet up and we can see the skeleton underneath. I just think it's a really fun, interesting character. It also came part of an interesting wave of figures as well. We obviously got that Tiger that until last year was the only Tiger we had in the line, so that made it kind of fun as well. Now, I am aware that this figure is far from perfect. This, of course, was from the early days of when Hasbro took over the license from ToyBiz. It was actually one of the harder ones to build, certainly in the UK. It was very difficult to get hold of these figures. So I think scarcity plays a factor in its ranking for me, and as I said, it's not one I've actually managed to track down myself, so there's definitely something special about this figure in terms of my wish list. But I have to say, I do think this is a really cool looking figure. Okay, at number 7 I have the Ironmonger. Now, I have to be honest, as a character, I'm not a huge fan of the Ironmonger. It's not a character I particularly like or that I really desperately wanted to have a figure of in my collection, but what I do think is very cool is that this represents an Iron Man villain Build-A-Figure, and we have so few Iron Man villains in the Marvel Legends line, even after all this time. I think that's very, very cool. I like that it is a souped-up version of Iron Man. I love that he's oversized. When you put these figures next to each other, obviously he towers above Iron Man, which makes him a proper legitimate threat, which is great. But the other thing is as well, although some of these parts have been reused and recycled later on and for other figures, I actually think this is a really nice looking visual when you put him in the collection. I particularly love the paint apps that they've used on this figure. That metallic blue paint is brilliant. It looks so shiny, it catches the light beautifully, and it looks really good. The other thing is the articulation is surprisingly good. You think it might be quite clunky and a little bit tricky to put in various different poses because it's such a chunky, big, thick figure, but actually it works really, really well. Surprisingly, you can get this figure in a lot of different cool, menacing poses, which is really fantastic. If we look at the ball joint in the head as an example, you might think you wouldn't be able to get much motion or range out of this, but it's so well designed that actually, yeah, you can. You can get loads, which is brilliant. So I think this is a really cool looking figure. I love the paint apps on it, and I love how it scales against Iron Man in particular and other characters in this line. I think it's a really impressive one. Again, it's one of those ones I think is a little bit trickier to track down. It was originally released as part of an Iron Man 3 wave, I think, way back when, and it's a really fun one to have in the collection. And again, it's just so different to anything else that we see from these Build-A-Figures that I think it works really, really well. Finally, for this video, at number 6, I have the Kingpin / Shadow King, because once again, we have a figure here that is actually two characters in one. Of course, on the one hand, we have the Kingpin, which is what this wave was centered around. It was a Spider-Man themed wave, which is actually a pretty cool wave all in all. And of course, it built up the Kingpin in this white suit. This is a fantastic figure in its own right. It's big, it's chunky. We actually had a cool accessory in that cane, but we also had two different head sculpts for the Kingpin as well, which is really cool. So not only do we get this figure, but we actually get a figure with a variation there. So we can have its calm head, or we can have him with a raged head, which is very, very cool. This is a nice oversized figure, nice and chunky, which is absolutely brilliant, and of course entirely appropriate. A very key character as well to have in the line. We've had a Kingpin in the past from the ToyBiz years, but its scaling is a little bit off. It doesn't look quite as good with this modern line that we have from Hasbro. So having one in scale with the correct proportions is fantastic, and he's very domineering. He's a very big chunky figure. Yes, some of these parts have been recycled since for the Joe Fix-It Hulk, for example. And yes, even I take issue with the knee joints in particular. It looks very distracting having that ball joint there, breaking the look of the seam of the leg. So it doesn't look quite right, but other than that, I think this is an absolutely fantastic figure. I love this character. I love how we got him scaled up correctly, which is brilliant. But also, for me personally, the fact that we have the Shadow King option as well. Now, the Shadow King head came with the Charles Xavier, or Professor Xavier, deluxe figure from a few years ago. Brilliant choice that we can actually have the Shadow King. And that, for me, is probably the more exciting option of the two, to actually have this character, because this is one that, again, you wouldn't normally expect to get, really, unless you're having a very specific X-Men themed wave. Really cool, very key Claremont character. Brilliant to have this in action figure form, and I love the versatility, the choice between the two. Absolutely fantastic figure, and I think definitely deserves to be in anyone's top 10. Well, that's it for this video. I will pick up Spaces 5 to 1 in the next video, which I'll post next week. In the meantime, please let me know what you think of my choices, whether you agree or disagree. It's always fun to have the discussion. And you will probably have noticed that so far all of these entries have been from the Hasbro years, and there hasn't been anything from ToyBiz. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the ToyBiz Builder figures, and you might see one or two of them in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.